they've also been caught faking some of this. For example, Max Blumenthal has done some very good work on this. Showed it turns out the one scene of an allegedly murdered and raped woman, Israeli woman, that they were broadcasting, actually came from several years ago. It was something they found on the internet, apparently, a scene of a woman fighter in Syria, the anti-government Syrian forces, the militants that are fighting against the government. Or I think she was a Kurd woman or something like that. So in other words, the one visual image they showed of an allegedly raped and murdered Israeli woman was actually a Kurdish fighter from several years ago that they found on the internet. So, if that is the best they can do, it shows that they have no evidence at all. And they're simply producing black propaganda to try to distract the world from the fact that thousands, even possibly tens of thousands of innocent women and children have been killed in Gaza right now. And the reason I say, there's basically never been anything like this in the history of the world. There certainly have been huge massacres. For example, I think probably 500 or 600,000 Tutsis were chopped up by machetes in Rwanda about 30 years ago by the Hutu militias. And certainly there have been larger massacres in the history of the world, but there's never been a televised massacre of this size. In other words, we're talking about not African villagers where nobody knows what's really happened. Nobody can even say the numbers involved. We're talking about a perfectly developed, civilized area of the world where people have video cameras, where people have smartphones, where people have broadcast facilities. And we're seeing it. You can see basically these children and women being dragged out of the rubble. And many of them being shot dead by Israeli snipers. There were, for example, a couple of Christian women who were taking shelter at one of the last churches still standing in Gaza, who were murdered by Israeli snipers. That's simply outrageous. And the fact that the Israelis think that they can get away with something like this, is just a sign of the stranglehold the pro-Israeli forces have over the media and politics, not only in America, but most of Europe as well. It's just unbelievable. And I think the Israelis have become so arrogant in the stranglehold their supporters have over the West that they may be taking things too far. And, for example, you have the case of some of these pro-Israel Jewish billionaires saying that, anybody who would protest against these atrocities, to organize pro-Palestinian protests on elite universities, should be blacklisted and denied any future employment in a good job, which is just outrageous. So, I think what's going on here is, again, you have a mixture, you have almost a game of telephone involved. In other words, you have Israel committing all these outrageous atrocities, but broadcasting their support is broadcasting this ridiculous propaganda, claiming that Hamas is beheading Israeli babies. Then you have, to be honest, I think what amounts to some very gullible Jewish billionaires who are supportive of Israel and don't really follow the media very carefully. They're generally in their 60s or 70s themselves, who believe this outrageous propaganda and believe that Hamas is beheading Israeli babies, roasting babies in the oven, chopping off the breasts of women. And they become outraged that anybody seems to be supporting Hamas or the Palestinians on these university campuses. So, that's the sort of way propaganda has always worked. In other words, propaganda has always been used to win over people who don't really investigate very carefully or look very closely. And in this case, it's simply people like President Joseph Biden, the members of his cabinet, the members of his government, or some of these very wealthy and powerful pro-Israel billionaires, most of them Jewish, but not all of them Jewish, who are able to then, try to blacklist these individuals or demand the resignation of university presidents who are taking a more even-handed approach to something like this. So, it's just an outrageous situation, not different in kind than has often happened in the past, but certainly different in degree. In other words, I can't think of any previous situation where so many tens of thousands of victims have been killed in a one-sided bombardment of a densely populated urban area. There's nothing like it that's happened, I think, in modern times.